Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us at the Learning Technologies Autumn Forum 2025. This is the last talk of today, so thanks for sticking with us. My name's Liz Drury. I'm a freelance voiceover artist specialising in e-learning, and I'm your chair for this session. Now, we've got a great guest for you this afternoon, David Kelly, former chairman and CEO of Learning Guild, and this is going to be quite an interactive session. So please do make use of the chat box and the questions box and keep David on his toes. So let's introduce David. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, David.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, now you're going to be talking about the latest trends in AI and digital learning, which is a hot topic, of course. And so I will leave you to explain more.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the introduction. And thank you to all of you for joining us, especially the last session here of the day. Been some great sessions here today, and I hope that I can keep that trend going for you. So thank you so much for joining me. Just a little bit about myself to get started here. I have been in the learning and development space for a couple of decades now. I keep the hair short to hide how long I've been in it because the hair color shows it. But I have been in this field for a couple of decades, and I've always worked at the intersection of learning and technology. I spent the first maybe decade or so of my career working internally in finance and nonprofits for a number of countries in the United States. And then about a little over 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to join the organization called the Learning Guild. I was the CEO and chairman there for a while. They're a professional development organization that predominantly works in the United States, but has global support there as well. But my passion has always existed at the intersection of learning and technology. And I enjoy exploring that space, working with organizations and individuals to help make strategies and implement new systems in ways that can help the individuals that we serve in our field. If you want to learn more about me, or if you want to connect, you can scan that QR code. It'll connect us on LinkedIn. I'll show it again at the end. That's a little bit about me. And what's interesting is I've had the opportunity to have conversations like this all around the world. My work has brought me all around the world where I can speak with people and organizations about this intersection of learning and technology. And it's usually around the context of emerging technologies and how do we make sense of them and how do we take advantage of the opportunities there. And what I always find interesting in those discussions is that people kind of come to those discussions with the expectation that I'm going to provide the answers. Even when I'm doing a keynote for hundreds of people, there's still an expectation that I'm going to be coming in delivering answers, and it's always fascinating to me because I don't come with the expectation of delivering answers because in order for me to give an answer, there's too much context involved in it. If I'm sitting in a room, I've had the opportunity to speak at the Learning Technologies Conference a number of times. There's hundreds of people in the room, and when I'm talking to people, that the answer of what makes something a good technology for someone, whether there's a new technology that's emerging and it's going to be beneficial to the organization or just be something that's hype filled, it's very contextual. In order for me, there is no one right answer to that question. In order for me to give someone the right answer, I have to have a conversation with them, find out the unique context. What resources do they have available? What's the size of their team? What's the culture of their organization? There's so many questions that are unique to an organization and an individual's work that ultimately inform the answer. So what I want to host here today is not necessarily a conversation around the trends and the answers related to those trends. I want to focus more on asking the right questions. The types of questions that we can ask ourselves, that we can ask in our organizations, that are going to inform in a learning technology strategy. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking a lot about AI. You've heard a lot about AI. And AI is the metaphorical hammer that we're all being hit with right now. And we're going to talk a little bit about AI. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the other trends that are existing in the emerging technologies field. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the larger elephant in the room for me, the thing that I think we often skip. Because in order for us to really take advantage of the opportunities that an emerging technology presents with us, we have to acknowledge the baggage that we're carrying with us. I refer to it as the baggage of what is. What do I mean by that? I feel like I've been in this field for a long time, and regardless of what the emerging technology is, I feel like we're always held back by carrying this baggage of what is. And how do I define the baggage of what is? Well, let me give you an example. It starts with the questions that we're asking ourselves. When a new technology emerges, we often ask ourselves a question like this: how do I do what I do with this new technology? Now, on its surface, that's not a bad question. It's a question that is asking, this new technology has emerged, and how do I do what I do with it? But it's a great example of the question having baggage attached to it. And for me, that baggage is the words, what I do, because we tend to have an immediate reaction to something. It's like, oh my gosh, there's this new technology that emerged. It's disrupting the work that I do. How do I continue to do what I do with this new technology added to the equation? And it's not, again, at its surface, it's not bad, but when you carry the blinders of what I do, that is a very limiting definition of a very limiting lens with which to look through a new technology, because it comes with the baggage of what I do. And in order for us to really see the opportunity that exists within a new technology, we have to look beyond what I do and explore it with a better question. It starts with a better question. And we've been through this before. I know everyone's focused on AI, but we've been through this before. And I want to focus a little bit on what we can learn from history. I mentioned before, I've been in this field for a while. When I started in this field, this is what my role looked like. I'm a trainer by accident, like a lot of people in this field. I was in banking. I was very good at my job. And they said, you should go show other people how to do it. And suddenly I became a trainer and discovered I loved it. But this was my world. Every time someone needed training in the banking field, when I started, they had to come to a workshop. They had to come into the training classroom and be shown how to do something. They had to leave work, be shown how to do something so they could go back to work and apply. And this was my world. And then one day, personal computers became ubiquitous. Again, I'm aging myself here, but doing a little carbon dating here. But suddenly, we had these new things available to us where people could take learning experiences on a computer. And now we had this disruption of the personal computer being ubiquitous, and now we can leverage them for the context of learning and education. And it was very disruptive. And we went through it, and we adapted. So suddenly, with my spot in the middle of the training room where I could facilitate a workshop changed, where I had to be able to support learning experiences through a screen. And then you fast forward a little further, and the screen got smaller. We got these new devices, these smartphones, which had more power than the personal computers that we started with in our pockets now. We had these new experiences. Now we can do mobile learning, which became a new term at the time. And all of these were major disruptions that changed what it meant to do learning and development and to be a learning and development professional. And they were really disruptive, and they transformed in many ways what we do. However, if you zoom out and you look at all of these things together, the disruption of going from classroom training to e-learning, traditional e-learning, to mobile learning, as we called it at the time it emerged, and you zoom out a little bit, while the technology changed, did our methods really change that much? Because if you look at it, and again, I'm painting a very broad stroke here, but when we went from the classroom to e-learning, what did we really do? In many cases, we took the PowerPoint that we used in the classroom training and we put it on a screen and we added a next button. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying it, but for a broad stroke, that's a lot of that happened. And then when mobile learning came, we took that e-learning experience and we just shrunk it to the point that some people couldn't even read it. But we've learned a lot since then. But that's what we did, because we looked at it again through the lens of, how do I do what I do? I'm a classroom trainer. Now we've got these screens. How do I do what I do? And we took the easy way, and we just took what we did and we translated it to a new technology. We didn't change the method. We just changed the vehicle in which the method was applied. And I think we've had that habit a lot in our field. And it starts with the question that we ask ourselves when when a new technology emerges. How do I do what I do with this technology? Has the blinders of what I do attached to it? And that's why when we look at those trends of what we looked at history, that's why a lot of that happens, because we look at it through the lens of what I do. I would argue we need a better question. How does this new technology change what I do? An emerging technology comes about. That's the first question we should be asking ourselves, because that's a question that physically, metaphorically breaks down the barriers. It takes down the blinders, because it's a question that opens itself up to opportunity. When you look at it and say, how does it change what I do? Now you're looking at new things. You're looking at new opportunities. And that's where the question becomes really powerful. If we ask ourselves these questions intentionally, and for me, that's a big part of it that I'll revisit a lot, the intentionality of asking ourselves very specific questions, and not just going through the motions of asking ourselves a question, going through the easy answers and moving on, being very intentional about digging deep into some of these questions. It starts with this one for me. How does this new technology change what I do? Whatever the emerging technology is, it definitely applies to the world of AI, which we'll talk about. But whenever an emerging technology is, I don't care whatever the big thing is next, Start with this question. It's a question that focuses you on the opportunities that exist within L&D, not just the maintenance and the efficiency attached to what we already do. You'll notice as I'm talking here, the words that we use matter a lot to me. At this stage of my career, I am very focused on the language that we use in L&D because I think it shapes what we do as L&D professionals. I follow a lot of the work of a lot of great people in our field and inside and outside of our field. One of the people who've influenced my career a lot is the classic philosopher George Carlin. If you're familiar with that name, George Carlin is a very famous American comedian, but he was also very insightful. I find comedians can often shed light on a lot of stuff that we do in our field, and and a lot of stuff that we do in the world. They shed light on things to make us see it from a different angle. And I think that could be very powerful. Anytime you're able to position a conversation so that it gets us to see the world that we live in from a different angle, it can be very powerful. So what do I say the words that we use matter? Let me just skip in here. There we go. I would argue if we take even another question, how does this technology enhance our learning programs? Focus on the words that we're using here, because this is where it becomes really powerful. How does this tech enhance our learning programs? You might look at that and say, it's just another version of how does this technology change what I do? But again, I try to be very intentional about the language that we're using. This question, while it's a better question in some ways, still carries baggage with it because it brings with it this idea of our job is to create learning programs. And in some cases, you might think of that and say, it is our job. That is our job. But it's a very limited window on what our job is. If we really want to adapt to the shifts that are going on around skills-based hiring and skills-based job support and competency-based programs, we need to think differently about what it means to be an L&D professional. And some of the ways that we need to support workflow learning, and some of this you heard about a little bit earlier today, some of the ways that we need to support the new ways that people are working, the whole future of work, as much as it's a cliche, when we think about how people are changing and workplaces are changing, we need to adapt to that. And some of the legacy stuff that we do around building a learning program doesn't necessarily adapt. Our job isn't to create learning programs. It's a part of our job. Sometimes creating a formal learning program is the right solution to a particular performance problem, to a particular goal that we have with an organization. But it shouldn't be the default solution that we apply to every situation. Our job is not to create learning programs. It's a part of our job in some cases. I would argue a better question to pose, rather than looking at it through the lens of how does this tech enhance our learning programs, look at the technology and say, how can I better support performance using this technology? That's our job. That's really our job here. One of the things that I very often say, some people don't like the phrase, but it's something that I truly believe in, is that most organizations, or all organizations for that matter, don't care about learning, at least at its core. Even if you might hear that statement and think, well, my organization's got a great, strong learning culture. We believe in learning. We support the growth of our people. And that is very well true. And if so, I credit your organization for that. But they don't care about it in the context of learning in and of itself. They care about it in the context that they understand that if people are learning, if people are growing their skills, they are adding more value to their organization. That's why they care. They don't care about learning for learning's sake. They care about learning because they understand that learning can increase someone's performance, and that creates more value for an organization. It might sound a little selfish, but it's a reality. And that's why I think this question is better for us, because if we look at it through the lens of how can this technology be leveraged in a way that supports performance, then we have a much broader lens than we're going to use this technology to build another course. We have a lens that is more broad, that can just say, how can I leverage this technology in ways that can support people's performance? This is where I get to the fact that the words matter, because George Carlin, as I mentioned, he was the person that he has a famous routine that says, he talks very much about language. You can Google it. It's just about 5 minutes, but it's very funny, obviously, but it's very powerful. And in it, he says this, which has always been something that I come back to. We think in language. And so the quality of our thoughts and ideas can only be as good as the quality of our language. And we have a lot of jargon in our field. If we constantly think in the terms using words like courses or learning programs or learning in and of itself, it shapes how we view the work that we do. It shapes the output. If we changed our language and looked at it through the lens of performance and looked at it through the lens of supporting people's performance, and looked at it through the lens of that's our job, how can we do that? We start seeing new opportunities that are broader than what we've done in the past as a field. And I think that it becomes more important as technology emerges and we're able to track people's skills and track people's competencies and really make more connections between what learning professionals do and the impact that it has on metrics that matter within our organization. We need to be broadening the spectrum in terms of the solutions that we're providing. And it starts with better questions. So with that, I think another question that we could do is flip. Another piece of this that I think is important to us is for us to flip the equation. We tend to look at new technologies through the lens of ourselves. How does this technology change what I do as a learning professional? How does this new technology change the work that we can do? How can I as a learning professional support people better in their work? It's a very internal view. Our job, we have to also have an external view. There's two sides to any time an emerging technology emerges. I feel there's two sides to the coin, and we traditionally focus on the one side that is our impact. How does it impact us and the work that we do on a daily basis? I think we also need to be looking very often at the other side. How does this emergence of a new technology change the work of the people that we support? And I think this gets very much into the context of what's going on with AI right now. A lot of the AI discussion that I see in the learning industry right now focuses on the ways that we can do what we do more efficiently. We're focusing very much on the work that we do and how to use AI to expand the value that we do, whether it be through efficiency or new value. But AI is not just changing the work of learning professional, it's changing the nature of work itself. And if the way that work gets done is changing, our job needs to evolve accordingly. If the people that we support, their work is fundamentally changing, we need to be understanding of that. We need to be following that. We need to be tracking that, because if their job evolves, our job in supporting their work evolves accordingly. We need to be aware of that. We need to be paying attention to that side of the equation more than ever. Because if the world of work itself is changing, by definition, the work of the learning professionals who support work is changing. And we need to be paying attention to that. We need to be asking ourselves intentionally those questions around, all right, we support this particular set of the audience. How is their work evolving by the introduction of these new tools and these new technologies? How does that mean? How do our programs need to evolve in accordance with that? We tend to skip over that sometimes, and we need to be very intentional about asking that. Okay. So with that in mind, I want to jump into some of the technologies beyond just AI that are still evolving. Right now, there's such a spotlight on AI that everything else is getting drowned out. So I want to focus a little bit more on some of the technologies that are going on. There's overlap with what's going on in AI, no question, but I want to focus a little bit more on some of the unique things that are going on along with AI. There's a lot of I'm going to talk about a couple of different ones that are trending. There's a lot of overlap between them. I want to make sure that people are aware of that. There's a lot of overlap. I will at times during the next couple of minutes get on my metaphorical soapbox, where I will share things that are very much about my perspective on things, and I'll try to acknowledge that when I do. So let's start talking about data and analytics, because that is a trend that has been going on. It is a trend that is picking up steam with the introduction of AI, and it's one that has tremendous potential within the work of L&D. Before I get into the specifics of this, I do want to acknowledge the image that I'm using here, because I can't attribute it. I wish I could. This is an image that I've seen over the years that has very much represents my view on why data and analytics is so important for learning professionals. I wish I knew where it came from so I could attribute it properly, but I've never been able to locate where it came from. So I acknowledge the fact that I should be attributing it, but I couldn't. At this stage, I can't. If you know where it is, please let me know. But I want to share why this is such a powerful image. I've been using this image to describe the data and analytics conversation since the term big data was trending, which is dated now. But for me, it's a very powerful example of why data and analytics is so powerful for organizations and so powerful for learning professionals themselves. It starts with the term big data itself, which we've been using forever, and it still astounds me how many people define it just using the words. Well, what's big data? Well, it's data, but it's really, really big. That doesn't help us at all. And it's not about how much data is there, although that's part of the equation. There's an enormous amount of data that grows every single day, more data than we've ever had available to us. It's also not about the excuse me, the power of the computer, which gets us into the center column here around analytics. One of the equations here with big data isn't just the data points, it's the fact that we have computers that are powerful enough to take that massive amount of data and organize it in a way that makes sense. That's really powerful. But again, that to me is not why this conversation is so important. What's really important, and it's becoming more important every day because these technologies are emerging in our space to make a difference, is that we have huge amounts of data, very powerful applications and computers that can make sense of the data that are helping us inform decisions. That to me is the key element here. And it's not just that the businesses are doing this. Businesses have been doing this for years, but it's starting to be very practically applicable in the space of learning and development. As long as I've been in this field, we have been talking about data in the context of completions and how many people went through the course and how many people are got their stuff done by the compliance date. And those have been metrics that have mattered for us, but they're not business metrics. One of the reasons that we've always had this discussion around a metaphorical seat at the table is because our data conversation, one of the elements is our data conversation is one of support, not of strategy. If we want to connect our work to business to get more strategic in the business, we have to speak the language of the business, not the language of L&D. And we now have data that is going to enable us to be this. When we talk about the skills methodology that's emerging in our field, we now have platforms that can take what someone's doing, and instead of just tracking the fact that they participated in something, to bring it down to a competency level, what skill they have and how that can be applied, and connect the programs that we're doing to specific skills that are applied in specific ways that provide specific business value. That path of our activity to a specific business metric that matters is really, it's becoming a very real path that we can track and tell our story through. And for me, that's huge. Now, this is the first kind of soapbox moment of what's going in here. And I am following along in chat. I love some of the comments that are coming in there. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in there while I'm following along as well. So first soapbox moment for a moment. Every technology, I'm going to bring it up in the context of data and analytics, but every technology needs to be viewed through the lens of your context, your organization you work for, the culture that it's in, the resources you have available, et cetera, et cetera. I mentioned it earlier. So you might be hearing what I'm saying around data and analytics and how these platforms are emerging that enable us to track people's behaviors and skills in ways we have not been able to do in the past, and think we're not going to do that. We don't have the budget, we don't have the resources, we don't have the culture that could support one of these systems that are going to enable us to connect. I don't have access to the data to do this thing. And you may be absolutely right. Any emerging technology that comes, you may not necessarily have the access, the skills, the knowledge, the culture to support being proactive about implementing a strategy that leverages an emerging technology. I'm going to bring it in the context of data and analytics as a start, but this applies anywhere. That may be true, and that there's no judgment attached to that. You have to apply. So you have to exist in the world that you live in, and I don't necessarily think that there's a right or a wrong answer. There is a right or a wrong answer given your context. However, even if you're in a situation, and I'm using data and analytics as the example, it applies elsewhere. Even if you're looking at the context that you're in and saying, I wish I could harness some of the potential that's available here, some of the things that David's describing. I wish I was in a situation to just take advantage of this and proactively put strategies in place to do that. I just don't have those. There are too many doors closed to me for me to be proactive in that space. That may be true. No judgment on that. It doesn't absolve you from the data and analytics conversation, because when an emerging technology surfaces in the field, you need to be aware of it. You need to be tracking it. You need to develop what I often call conversational competence, because an emerging technology can affect your work in two ways. It can have two entry points to impacting your work. One is what we've been talking about. This sounds great. There's a lot of potential here. I want to proactively build this into my strategy. That's option one. And if you're in a situation where you're empowered and you have the resources to do that, I encourage you to explore it. But you may not be. And if you're in that situation, it doesn't absolve you for it, because the reality is some of these changes are happening through the business, And they may not necessarily be something that you can proactively take advantage of in your field, in your space, but you may need to react to it if it impacts your business. So you don't want to be in a situation where an emerging technology comes in, you don't have the opportunity to harness the potential of it, but you one day get a knock on the door from your IT department that says, okay, we're putting in a new system that's connecting all of our data across the entire organization. It's going to enable us to have competency-based frameworks that enable us to put into place, from an HR perspective, a skill-based hiring. We need to connect everything in your LMS system to bring those data points into this data set so that we can put this in place. You don't want to have that knock on the door from the IT department, have them say that to you and say, that sounds great, just give me 20 minutes to Google everything that you just said. You want to be aware of what's going on technologically within the field, within the industry that you're in, within your particular company, so that if on chance, even if you're not proactively driving something forward, if something is presented to you, if it comes in through another area of the business, you are at least knowledgeable enough to participate in that conversation if it's presented to you. That's where that seat at the table, again, it's another element of the seat at the table, is being aware of what's going on within your business so that you have the ability to react and respond to something if it's presented to you. So again, it applies to every emerging technology. I bring it up in the context of data analytics because it's the first place that it kind of emerges from there. Okay, next trend here. So again, for each one of these, I'm going to present a little bit of an intentional question that you can ask yourself to help getting to be a little bit more strategic about some of these trends. So for data analytics, a question I always recommend to people is to ask yourself, what's the data that the stakeholders use to tell their stories? We have to stop telling our stories through our jargon. Nobody cares about our jargon. Let's be honest. The business leaders normally don't care about our jargon. If they do, it's because they have enough context of our space to connect our jargon to the metrics that matter. So either speak to the bench, we can skip over that step if we just tell our story through the metrics that matter. Even if it's correlation, people pay attention if you're talking about the metrics that matter to them. So find out what data your stakeholders use to tell their stories and find ways to tell your stories using those metrics. Next trend, advanced learning platforms. Now, some of the data and analytics stuff that I talked about here is being mined by advanced learning platforms. And I just broadly describe them as advanced learning platforms. You might see them as LXPs. One of the things I will say is that we hear about LMS and we hear about LXPs and we hear about LCMSs. We hear about all these acronyms about different platforms. But there are not hard black and white lines between all of these platforms these days. There is a lot of gray in the spaces here. Just because you might be using an LMS does not necessarily mean it's a legacy LMS that does all of the things that we sometimes assume an LMS does for our organization. It could be doing cutting edge things that are enabling us. I look at an LMS similarly to how I look at PowerPoint. PowerPoint gets a lot of grief as a technology that produces a lot of bad stuff. PowerPoint does not produce anything bad. People do, it's a matter of how we're leveraging the technology. I would apply the same logic to an LMS. Can't tell you how many times I have spoken to organizations about wanting to go onto a new platform to enable, want to get off their current LMS platform to get onto a platform that can enable some new and different complex learning strategies. And when I have the conversation with them, they're very often stunned. I'm like, well, your current LMS can do that. You just have to look beyond the surface level of how you're using it and get into some of the more complex functionality that's available to you. So sometimes the system is not just, you shouldn't judge a system based on its features and benefits that are on the website. You have to look into how you're using the system. Are you using it to the most complex applications that you can? Are you using it properly? I think that's a huge element here. So when we talk about these advanced learning platforms, there's a lot of functionality that can enable us to do a lot of things. A lot of the skills-based hiring that we're talking about now, a lot of the skills-based support that L&D professionals are doing, they're being part of this conversation. There are platforms that are out there, the LXPs and things of that sort, that are taking the ceiling, the technological ceiling that we've been butting up against as long as I've been in this field, and they're raising it there. That ceiling is going away and it's being replaced by a much higher ceiling that enables us to do a lot more complex types of support, a lot more data-informed strategies, a lot more real-time strategy support that we can do for people in ways that we haven't been able to do before. But it starts with, what are you trying to do? When you're looking at these platforms, You have to ask ourselves, how would our strategies improve with access to an advanced learning platform? This is where a lot of organizations miss it. And again, it applies to any technology, but we get distracted by shiny object syndrome. If you're going to go to a new platform, what's going to be different? Ask yourselves intentionally that question of, okay, if we go to this platform and we leverage the technology that's there, what's different? What's the new value that we're adding to our organization? What's the better stories that we can tell? How are we improving the support that we give to the audiences that we do? If you can't very succinctly articulate the answers to questions like that, you have to pause and think, are you ready to go to this platform? Because you should have very specific answers to questions like that before you take that first step forward. Next slide, microlearning. This is a slide that I think I've had about 10 different titles on, it always fascinates me. I've had microlearning on it. I've had, as you see here, I've had workflow learning. I've had performance support, but a couple of different things. I've been in this field for a long time, and I have to stop saying that because I'm making myself sound very old. But I've been in this field for a while, and I've seen a number of different labels applied to pretty much the same USP. It might change a little bit. It might evolve a little bit, but the bullseye of the target is always the same. Right now, the one that gets the most attention is microlearning. For me, I've been shooting for the bullseye of what I consider the bullseye to be of microlearning. Before I even knew there was a label. I mean, for me, when I was back in banking, when I first started with this field, I knew that people hated sending people to train because it was literally, I have to lose somebody for 3 days so they could go learn something so they can come back and then be more skilled. We were using the most disruptive model to train someone at that time. And I always knew people hated that. And I would challenge our team to say, what's the least disruptive way that we can solve this performance problem that's there? Do we need to bring everybody in, or is there a job aid that we can create? Or is there something we can do to just show people how to do this on the job without necessarily taking them out of the field for a day? I knew people hated to send their people from this training because they lost them for the day. So again, powerful question. For me, it started with what's the least disruptive way that we could solve this problem? To me, that's what microlearning is. It's what workflow learning is. Personally, I prefer the term workflow learning because at least it's talking about the key value proposition of let's not interrupt people. Let's find ways to support them in the workflow. That to me is better. Microlearning I use as the heading right now. This is a bit of a soapbox moment again, because it's the one that has it's taking the majority of the air out of the room. I actually liked the term when it first emerged, but one of the things that's fascinating about our field, and we're not unique in this, every field that has marketing attached to it goes through this, is there's a term that emerges and it has kind of a definition attached to it, but then people start using the term and they start applying the idea. And then the definition changes through the usage of the term and the way people are applying it. It's one of the reasons that I hate buzzwords. I mean, I exist at the intersection in learning technology. Buzzwords are a mandatory part of what I need to follow. It helps me follow the trend. But at the same time, I hate them. Why do I hate them? I hate them because of the way that I define a buzzword. I define a buzzword as a term whose usage has spread faster than its understanding. And to me, microlearning is one of the best examples of that. When microlearning emerged, it emerged as the technological emergence of the promise of performance support. Performance support was the idea of give people the opportunity to get the support that they need, when they need it, where they need it. But technology historically couldn't deliver upon that. Before mobile phones and things like that stuff. But now technology has emerged where our ability to give people support through technology in the moment, the technology's there. There are systems that can track what people are doing to recognize performance issues. Our ability to give people real-time performance support has emerged, and the ability to create these micro elements to give people the support that they need, when they need it, where they need it, has emerged. So in that context, micro-learning was really powerful for me. But then the buzz hit, and somewhere along the lines, again, this is my personal soapbox moment, somewhere along the line, the micro shifted from the micro of the context of the moment to the micro of the content. And microlearning became a discussion of, is microlearning under 3 minutes, or can it be over 3 minutes? And we started focusing microlearning on how short the content is. And then we started bringing in distractions like people's short attention spans and things of that sort. And for me, it kind of lost the plot a little bit. Google has done work. You could Google on Google this. Unrelated to learning, but for me, this is where the USP of microlearning should have landed. Google had done work on this thing that they called micro moments. It was a commerce thing, and they defined a micro moment as that moment when you're shopping online, and you're either going to click the buy now button, or you're going to change your mind. You're going to click that red X in the upper right hand corner, and that micro moment was being able to recognize the activity that someone is going through, that they're at that moment where they're either going to hit buy now or hit the X, and present something to them that encourages them to hit buy now rather than leaving the page. That to me is the USP of what microlearning should be. We're still, some of the technology around that is still emerging from mass adoption, but all of the bones are there in terms of being able to recognize where someone is struggling with a task and giving them the exact support that they need to solve the problem of struggle with that task to help them be successful. It's not about content being short. It's not about attention spans, for me at least. But so that's where microlearning is, and I think there's still some trends around that that we should be exploring. Again, for me, it comes down to that powerful question, and that's the one I still ask myself today in the context of microlearning or workforce support. What's that least disruptive way that we can solve this problem for someone? If they're struggling with something, if there's something that's there, what's the least disruptive way? It again steps away from we have a problem, we need to develop a course for this. No, what's the least disruptive way that we could do this? Is it a job aid? Is it I don't care if it's a Post-it note on someone's screen, on something that they need. Does it solve the problem? That's the lens that's going to help us get more from the power of microlearning, in my opinion. Okay, next one, personalized learning. Personalized learning is another buzzword in our field. It's another term, again, buzzword. I mentioned why I don't like buzzwords. Why do I feel it's a buzzword? Well, we've been talking about personalized learning forever. And personalized learning is another one of those terms that once we were able to deliver, it's a very broad spectrum of what personalized learning could mean. And I love Post-it notes too, Dan. I see your comment there. I'm looking at a bunch on the wall with my notes here. So personalized learning to me is another term that is, we're limiting the potential of it. Personalized learning is, right now we do, brief story to set this up. A couple of years ago, I was speaking at the London event for learning technologies, speaking on a topic similar to this around the trends that are there. And Don Taylor, the host of the event, called me, said one of the speakers had a travel issue, and asked if I would be able to step in to cover the session for him. I said, what's the session on? He said, personalized learning. I said, yeah, I'm familiar with it. I could put something together for you and do it. So that night, I'm sitting in my hotel room putting together a presentation that I'm going to give the next day. I had given my presentation in the morning. That night, I'm preparing the presentation. And I've got a bunch of browser windows open. I get a pop-up from LinkedIn that said someone mentioned me on LinkedIn. So highly distractible. I click that tab. And I see that someone was commenting on the session that I gave earlier today. And the comment was, I really enjoyed David Kelly's session. One of the things I found most interesting was he made a comment about personalized learning and how he shared why he doesn't believe personalized learning exists. And my immediate thought was, wow, that's really unfortunate, because I'm about to give a presentation on personalized learning tomorrow. But I still stand by that statement. And I brought it into the context of the session. Why did I say that in the statement? Because a lot of people will say personalized learning exists. If you walk through an expo hall, you'll see a lot of examples of personalized learning. But I think we've allowed, through the buzz, us to apply a very diluted version of what personalized learning is. If I go to log into my LMS, and the LMS understands the role that I have and the work that I do, and presents me with a bunch of courses that could be applicable to me, that matches against my profile, is that a personalized experience? Yes, there is more personalization than not doing that. But personalized learning is a spectrum of complexity, and I think that that's very early in there, and we shouldn't allow our definition of what a term is to be accepted as at an industry level by the most baseline application of a particular term. And I think that's why I say personalized learning doesn't exist, because if we're allowing it to be defined at that level, we're leaving an enormous amount of potential off the table. To me, personalized learning isn't around the Netflix of learning and personalizing against my interests or my job description. For me, the true potential of personalized learning is personalizing it against my skills and against my competency, which again, we keep revisiting this trend that's coming into our field and emerging because the technology is now starting to enable some of these things that we've been talking about for a while. And that excites me because personalized learning should be about what personalizing against competency. Example that I often use is, I wear an Apple Watch, and the second that I put it on, it verifies. I put in a code and it gives a verified signal it's me. I don't have to put my code in every time I look at it. As long as a clasp is on, it knows that it's me. And it could also give a broadcast signal verified of David Kelly. So what does that mean? It means that, again, if I walked up to a piece of equipment that I was going to use in the field, it could recognize that I'm an authorized user, allow me to use the piece of equipment. And it could also, hypothetically, it could take that verified signal, go into the HRIS system or wherever your organization is hosting competency data. Again, I'll oversimplify it. It could go in and check, does David Kelly have a beginner level, an intermediate level, or advanced level of competency with this piece of equipment that he's about to use? It finds that information out. It comes back, and now the machine is giving me an appropriate layer of support based on my competency in using it. That's just a very simplified example of a more personalized experience that matches against my competency, not necessarily the fact that based on my job role, I should be using this piece of equipment, so let's give them a course on it. That's the potential of personalized learning. And I think AI and a lot of the technologies that are here that are emerging right now are enabling us to move the needle on how we as an industry are defining personalized learning, which brings me to the question that I would ask people around personalized learning. A lot of people use personalization around learning. Personalized learning is jargon for L&D, but it's also something that people use because it's used in academic settings. It's used in the settings that we often hear around our children. So it's a bit more of a mainstream term, which we have to have context and some caution around, because people use it in different ways to describe personalization. So if you're going to use personalized learning and you're talking to stakeholders around it, what do people mean? You have to make sure that you have a shared definition of what we mean when we say personalization here. It's not necessarily around saying what is it truly personal. I'm not asking you to have a debate of, well, if you want people to get stuff that's matched to their job role, that's not really personalization. That's not my point. My point is, it's important to have yourself and your stakeholders on the same page in terms of how you're defining it related to a project. You need to make sure that there is a shared definition around your use of personalization from the start. Otherwise, when you start going down the road, people are like, well, is this really personalized? How much has been invested to get to the point where people see the output and then say, oh, this isn't what I meant when I said personalized? Make sure you have that shared definition when you're doing it. Okay, next technological trend, mixed reality. This is another one that I think is still emerging. It's interesting now because when and I'm saying mixed reality, I'm going to talk about AR and VR separately and together in this little context here. But essentially, when we say mixed reality, we're talking about AR and VR. And they are at two different elements of the spectrum in terms of their adoption. But VR came out first, and I think VR kind of went through that hype curve where it was really, really exciting. People did a lot of things in VR that didn't belong in VR, and then the excitement came down. I think it's kind of getting to a normalized perspective. We'll see a lot of stuff in the mainstream media that VR isn't necessarily, it's not delivering, and like Meta's taking their investment in VR and bringing it down and things of that sort. That doesn't necessarily mean VR is a failure. It means it's finding its place in my mind. VR is a very powerful tool in the context of learning and development. It's just not a catch-all. It's not something that should be applied for the shiny object nature of it. It should be used in very specific context. I'm a trendy guy. I like to explore this intersection of learning and technology. I'm very curious about shiny objects. So I've been playing in the VR space for a while. One of the things that's great about my work is when the Amazon truck drops off a box and my wife says, "What did you buy now?" I can genuinely say it's research, which works out well. So I've played with VR a lot. So I've been playing in the space of VR. When VR first came out, one of the first applications that I was really excited for was an application to learn about space from Neil deGrasse Tyson in a VR experience. And it was like this trifecta of interests. I'm a big fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson. I like space. I'm geeky about tech. So I was really excited for this VR experience. And then when I launched it, I was in a theater with a bunch of seats. And my first interaction was to choose where my seat was. And then I chose my seat, and up on the big screen in the front of the room, it said, start the presentation, and I hit it. And then in front of the screen walked Neil deGrasse Tyson's avatar, and then he talked to a PowerPoint. And I thought, oh no, 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 don't do this. And I quickly exited the application, because to me, that was not taking advantages of the unique affordances of VR. It didn't need to be VR. It wasn't solving for anything that couldn't be solved if I watched the same thing on YouTube. It was VR for VR's sake. And that was not a good application of VR, as compared to another space application that I did, where it took you out into the solar system and you got to explore planets. But every time you moved from one planet to another, you were able to appreciate the scale of size. You kind of merged from one to another, and you were able to appreciate, through the presence that VR gives you, the scale of the difference between the size of the sun and the Earth and all the different planets. And it leveraged VR in a way that enhanced the learning experience. That, to me, is where VR's potential is in those unique spaces where the ability to show someone scale, the ability to give someone the opportunity to practice. That's another area that VR does. Where when you have a skill that someone needs to learn, where the risk of failure attached to that skill is monumental, be it in dollars or literally loss of life, then the resources necessary to give someone a safe space to practice the development of that skills, even at a baseline level, becomes a warranted investment. So for me, it's not that VR, this is another area, soapbox moment for a minute, that VR is a good example to bring this in. When an emerging technology comes in, we're always kind of looking at it through the lens of what is it replacing? And I think that that's the wrong lens. It's not a matter of, I don't think any emerging technology, for the most part, emerges and replaces something else. It doesn't take that slice out of the pie. It's inserting a new slice into the pie. And maybe some of the other slices get smaller by the insertion of this new one, because VR become like the new thing that came out is a better contextual solution to specific problems than where we're using some solution A before. Now this new insertion is a better one, so I don't have to use solution A for this anymore. So that slice of the pie gets a little bit smaller because this new slice is a better solution for them. And VR is a perfect example of that. I think it occupies a small but important slice of the L&D pie, because it enables us to solve problems that we can't solve in any other way from the other slices of the pie. Now, mixed reality also includes AR. There's been a lot more AR solutions that are out there. I personally don't think AR has arrived as of yet for the full opportunity for L&D. There's a lot of cool applications of AR, but most of them fall into the QR code space. I don't mean that. I think that mean that more metaphorically than literally. I mean it in the context of bringing up my phone and scanning something. And for me, that very nature of that interaction is why I feel like we haven't reached its potential yet, because most of the AR that's there requires your mobile phone. And by definition, if I have my phone in my hand, my ability to interact is limited because my hand has something in it, as compared to the headsets that are there. I was one of the early adopters of Google Glass. A lot of people look at Google Glass and talk about it as in the context of failure. I don't. I think actually Google Glass was a very successful technology for two reasons I say that. One is it makes me feel a lot better about paying $1,500 to beta test their product. But the other reason, which is less sarcastic, is because it worked. It did what it did. What it did was simple, but what it did worked. It had some very simple AR technology, but it it was there when you wanted to use it, and it disappeared from the user's view when you weren't. You felt like you were wearing glasses, and when you wanted to do it, you'd call it up and you would see the overlay, and when you were done using it, the overlay went away and you just saw the world around you. It was a support tool that was there when you needed it, disappeared when you didn't. Where it failed as a technology was that it was very distracting to everyone around you. And that's why it failed. It didn't fail from a technology standpoint for the baseline of what it did. It failed from a consumer's perspective of where things it wasn't normalized. People thought I was a cyborg walking around with this computer on my head. As AR technology gets normalized and it becomes, you look at what Facebook's got now with the Ray-Bans that are out there. It looks like you're wearing glasses. It doesn't look like you're wearing a computer on your head. And as those become more normalized, and you have the ability to have AR support where your hands are free and you can interact. One of the most powerful things I did with Google Glass when it came out, you had the ability to do what Google called at the time. They don't do it anymore. It's called a Hangout. It's essentially like a Google Meet. I called it a Hangout at the time. But when you did it with Google Glass, right now, you see right now you're used to doing things in virtual classrooms where you just see each other's face. When you were doing it with Google Glass, I saw you the same way I would in Zoom, but what you saw was what I was looking at. And what I did as an experiment, which was really, really amazing for me, was I'm not good with cars. And I had a friend of mine who's good with cars, join me in a Google Hangout and was going to coach me through doing an oil change. And it was really, really interesting because he was able to just coach me. He saw what I was doing. He was like, all right, I want you to check your oil. And I went in and he's like, all right, okay, that's your wiper fluid. Stop touching that. It's the yellow one on the left. And I got real-time support. And it was just such an amazing moment that I was like, wow, this is changing the way that I could get support for something. We learned in that moment that I should not be touching my engine. But it was a very, very powerful moment. And now technology has emerged where in that moment he could have circled, like now technology's there where he could do the same thing, but he could circle exactly. I want you to touch the dipstick. It's over here and circle on my screen so I could see exactly what it's doing. That's where AR's potential comes in. And where I think it's going to become very powerful for us. I also, with one last soapbox moment on AR, that kind of applies everywhere. AR is probably, in most cases, I don't believe AR is a tool that's going to emerge in the L&D space, that we're going to be buying these tools to use in the context of L&D. It's going to be bought as a workplace tool. It's going to be bought for the manufacturing floor or wherever it happens to be. It's a workplace productivity tool that is going to enter through that space. And therefore, we're going to have access to it to train people on how to use it in the context of their work. So we will leverage this tool in L&D spaces if it's an appropriate solution, but probably not through the traditional channel of we're going to buy it as a tool to use for L&D solutions. It's going to emerge as a tool to be used in the workplace productivity, and therefore the work changes and our ability and our need to support that evolving nature of work and the introduction of this tool changes accordingly, like we touched on before. Next one. The question for mixed reality. Again, we've touched on this already. Again, it occupies a small slice of the pie. What problem can this technology solve that we can't solve today? If you can't very specifically articulate an answer to that question, why would you spend the money on it? Now, we've touched on AI through all this. You've heard about AI a lot. I am not going to talk in detail around that. I see the question that came through Rachel. I'll address that at the end. But I do want to say one thing about AI. I think a lot of our AI conversation is focused on how it affects learning and development as a field. And I think we need to start asking ourselves, how do these tools enhance learning? And I don't necessarily mean learning through the context of learning professionals. I mean this through the context of the way that work gets done, the way that people exist in the digital world is changing through the emergence of these tools. Think about how your mobile phone changed the way that you learn. Just in the context of, if somebody asked a question and you didn't know the answer to it, your knee-jerk reaction is to pull out your phone and say, I'll Google it and get the answer. That's a technology changing the way that we learn. It's a problem-solving methodology of just kind of, I have a problem I don't know, I have a tool available to me that can give me the solution. AI is kind of the same thing. Think about what a Google search looks like to you today. I know I can describe it for myself. When I needed to do something, I would Google the topic so that I could find websites that might have the answer. Google is changing now, where you get that portion here where it gives you an AI-informed answer. And now I'm looking at that first. So I'm not necessarily Googling, and now I'm Googling questions rather than topics because of how Google is changing. So now I'm Googling questions that I expect to get a search result of the answer back, not necessarily topics where I can dig into it deeper. Again, it changes the nature of digital consumption, which changes the way that we learn through that digital consumption. And we need to be tracking how that's happening. So as we close our time here, I want to give you 8 questions that are on my list of questions that I ask around any emerging technology. I'm going to put them into the context of AI. These are very specific questions that I encourage you to ask yourself intentionally that can help you make more informed decisions about your adoption of AI tools. The first one, what problem are you trying to solve? It always starts with that. We shouldn't be implementing any technology for technology's sake. What problem are we trying to solve here? that's going to give you a better path to value than just not having an answer. If you have an answer to what problem we're trying to solve, then your implementation is by definition going to lead towards a more value-driven answer. Next question. How does AI change how people do their work? We've been talking about this. If the nature of how someone's work changes, if the nature of a technology is going to change the way that work gets done, then by definition, our work gets done. But it's a matter of conscious, not just thinking about this metaphorically and passively doing it. Get a piece of paper in front of you, or open a Word doc and answer this question intentionally. Write it down, because it's going through that intentionality of it is going to help you dig deeper into this answer and be more practical. What assumptions are we carrying over from older solutions? We do a lot of what we do because it's what we've done. And I think we should always take a moment to do like a devil's advocate moment and think, are there any assumptions about the solution that we're potentially putting in place that we're just carrying over because it's comfortable, because it's something that we do here? Ask yourself that intentionally. How are you going to know that this is working? That's another important question for me. If we're going to go down this path, what are the metrics that we should be looking at? How are we going to know that this worked, other than smile sheets that people thought it worked out well, they enjoyed it? How are we going to know that the implementation of a new tool is working? Have a very definitive answer to that question. This is another one I think people skip over. How is AI changing how you live your everyday life? This is, if we want to understand how technology is going to change how we learn, we have to look at how technology is changing how we live. Because if our way that we live and interact in a digital environment is evolving, then we need to, that's going to set expectations for the experiences that we have. If our existence in a digital world on an everyday life standpoint is evolving, that sets expectations for the digital experiences that we want to have in our workplaces, including our learning profession and our learning experiences. So how is AI changing your life on a daily basis? How does that inform what you do in L&D? Good example of what I mean here. Think about your mobile phone. Think about how you've used your mobile phone so far today. There's probably 30 different use cases of ways that you have used your phone and just through the day today. Now compare that to how you use the phones as part of an L&D strategy. I would venture to guess that there's a gap between those two use cases, and that's a gap of opportunity. That's a gap that exists in the answer to this question. Next one, how does this particular tool align with the culture and the values? A lot of times a new technology doesn't fail because of the technology or the implementation. It fails, it's a change management situation. It's a failure of culture. It's a failure of fit. So we have to really ask ourselves, are we doing this because it's going to solve problems? Does it fit? Or is it going to fail because we have some policies, procedures, and such that don't support the use of a tool? And this one for me is to adopt your inner 3-year-old. Ask relentlessly questions like how, where, why. The reason that I say embrace your inner 3-year-old, 3-year-olds ask the question how relentlessly. They're endlessly curious. As adults, I think we need to be intentionally curious. And asking how, you talk to a vendor about AI, everything is AI enabled today. Well, how is it AI enabled? Well, it does this. Well, how does that support the work that we do? Well, it does this. The more you ask how and why, the more you take a conversation that starts with this technology is going to matter to our industry. The more you ask how and why questions, the more you bring it down to how is it going to matter to me, to my organization, to my context. But again, asking it intentionally. And the last question I always recommend is, what am I adding that is uniquely human? We are all going through an evolution where a lot of stuff is going to be offloaded. It's going to be automated. We're going to be using technology to do what technology does better. If you're going to be spending less time organizing spreadsheets and reports because technology is going to make that a lot quicker, what's the new value that you're adding as a human? What is uniquely humanly valuable that you're going to be adding with the time savings you're going to be getting through the emergence of these tools? That's a really, really powerful question for us to be exploring as we collectively get to go through this evolution to what the new world of learning and development looks like, with AI tools powering a lot of what humans did before. It's a space of opportunity that is really powerful for me. But it's also a place of risk, because if we ignore this question, then we are creating risk around us. So I tend to go into this proactively and explore this, because then we can look at it through the lens of opportunity rather than ignoring it and creating risk around us. So those are some of the questions I encourage you to ask yourselves intentionally. Again, it all comes down to me for asking the right questions. And I know that there was a question coming into chat as we end our time here today. So I'll put this up here for anyone who wants to connect with you're asking any questions. I saw that there was a question coming through chat around gamification. So I just want to address that real quick. I didn't talk about gamification directly. I think that gamification is still there. Again, it's a slice of the pie that's important to us. Do I think it's a buzzword? Yeah, I think gamification unfortunately went through a place where people were gamifying things for the sake of gamifying things. They weren't gamifying it around engagement, they were gamifying it around fun. And fun for fun's sake is not strategic. If you have the opportunity to use gamification to create activities that motivate people to use it in a very strategic way, then it can be a very, very powerful tool. But again, it comes down to how are you using it, not gamification for gamification's sake. So I'm a big believer in gamification if it's used properly. So Liv, I know we're at the end of our time. Again, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to scan that QR code, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to continue the conversation there. I hope that some of these questions can inform your practice. I know we're at the end of our time. So Liv, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, David. That was a fantastic session. So much information to take in there. I'm sure people need to go in and just digest some of that now. Yeah, we are at the end of our time this afternoon. Our next session is next Tuesday. That's going to be at 9:30 a.m. That's UK time. The session is called Right Place, Right Time, The Future of Learning, Comms and the Next Generation Workforce. And that's with Fraser's group. So that's next Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. So I do hope that you will all be back to join us again on that. And yeah, thank you very much, David. Brilliant session, and look forward to our next sessions next week. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.